Hey everyone, it's Blake again with ChessPathways.com, and today we're talking about a very exciting opening called the Fried Liver Attack. The Fried Liver Attack arises out of the Italian game, which begins e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, very popular opening. Now black will often avoid allowing white to play the Fried Liver Attack because it's considered very dangerous for black. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to my video on the Italian game down in the description, so you can click that and get more background here for what black's options are. But the Fried Liver Attack is when black plays knight to f6, allowing white to play knight g5, attacking this vulnerable f7 pawn twice. Black's going to play d5 here to try to guard that pawn, and after white takes on d5, black will often here not recapture this pawn right away. Black has a couple options there that I discuss in my video on the Italian game. But a lot of beginners here are going to think, well, of course I'm going to take the pawn back. I don't want to be down a pawn. And this kind of falls right into the trap of allowing the Fried Liver Attack. After black plays knight takes d5, white has this surprising sacrifice, knight takes f7. Black really has no choice but to accept this sacrifice as the rook and queen are forked. And after king takes f7, queen to f3 check, this king has to come to e6. If the king retreats somewhere, like king e8, white's simply going to win the piece back. Now white's not even down material, and white's simply up a pawn. The king can't castle. This is just an unmitigated disaster for black. So instead, after queen f3, black needs to play king e6, so black can at least be up a piece for all his troubles here. So this position here is really the key starting position to the Fried Liver Attack. So what's going on here? White's down a full piece, right? White sacrificed that knight, and they have not won a piece back yet. So white's down a piece for just a pawn, but this king here on e6 is very vulnerable. This knight's pinned here. White almost always here continues with knight c3, increasing the pressure to this pinned knight, and the black position feels like it could fall apart at any moment. Now I mentioned that this is kind of a trap that a lot of players fall into as black. They kind of end up in this position unexpectedly, and I think that's because all the black moves here are so natural. All these moves are such normal developing moves. After knight g5, of course black's going to try to defend the f7 pawn, and after white takes a pawn, if black doesn't know better, of course they're going to take the pawn back, and all these moves are so forcing, so it's very easy for black to end up in this position kind of unwittingly. But there are some players who purposefully head to this position as black. They think that their extra piece is more valuable than white's possible attack here on their king, and the position remains highly unclear. It's not simply that white's winning, both sides are going to have their chances. So let's start analyzing this position here. What are black's choices? This knight on d5 is attacked 3 times and only defended twice, so black really has to reinforce that knight, and they only have 2 moves to do so. Black can either play knight to e7 to add some additional reinforcement to that knight, or black can come forward here with knight to b4. So let's start by considering knight b4, not only reinforcing this knight, but black has also freed the c-pawn to help bolster this knight, and also black is threatening to fork the white rook and king here with knight takes c2. One possible option for white is bishop to b3, simply defending this c2 pawn, but now black gets the chance to play c6, add some more support here to the knight. And white's in danger of this attack fizzling out if they're not careful. Black is threatening to possibly play king d7, when it would be kind of hard to stop the king from coming to c7 and later to b8. And while white would certainly have some compensation because of the awkward black development, white would remain down a piece. So let's see what white can try here. If white plays a3, trying to kick this knight away, black here has this idea to play queen f6. Black is offering to give the piece back. White can certainly win a piece here if white exchanges queens and then takes on b4. Then black will win a pawn for it, and now material is suddenly equal again. And black might argue here that in an endgame, this centralized king could even be a strength rather than a liability, although the pinned knight is certainly still awkward. White does not have to accept black's offer to return the piece, though. White can play queen e4 here and keep the queens on the board. This knight's still under attack. And here, again, black has a couple options. One kind of surprising one is knight takes c2, once again offering to give back that extra piece. This is an advantage, by the way, of having an extra piece. If you're up a piece, but you're under attack, you always have the option to think about these lines that give back the piece to end the opponent's attack. If your opponent's attacking you and material is equal, you don't really have that option. Your opponent doesn't really care if their attack ends in checkmate or if it ends with winning a piece. They're probably going to win either way. But if your opponent has invested material into their attack, like white does in the Fried Liver, always keep that option in mind. You might have a good opportunity to return the material. Here, after queen takes c2, queen g6, it's hard for white to avoid an exchange of queens. White could consider d3 and allow queen takes g2, but it's kind of inconvenient that the rook's under attack, and this queen even defends the knight from g2. On the other hand, if you take with the bishop here on c2, then you're breaking the pin here to this knight, and here black could play king to d6, and it's kind of hard to stop them from coming back with king to c7, and material is now equal. On the other hand, after queen e4, if black doesn't want to give the piece back yet with knight takes c2, black could just retreat this knight and play knight to a6. This allows white to capture here on d5, but this is only going to win a pawn, not a piece, because this pawn is defending this knight. For example, after knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, both sides won a knight, but now white's going to win a pawn out of it. Now white has 2 pawns for the piece, but black does still have that extra piece, and black can play king e7 here. The position, of course, though, does remain dangerous for black. White can play d4 here to try to open up the center, and white's going to try to castle and put a rook on the e-file, and it's not clear if black can survive this attack or not. So that was one option here. After knight to b4, we saw what happens if white just calmly defends this c2 pawn and black is able to play c6. But white often has a more aggressive approach here. White can actually just not defend this c2 pawn, and white can play a3 here right away, basically forcing black to make good on their threat to win the rook in the corner, and being happy that this knight has to abandon its counterpart here on d5. So knight takes c2 is essentially forced, king d1, knight takes a1, and now knight takes d5. Black's up a lot of material here, but of course their king is even more exposed than ever after this d5 knight has been taken, and white's already threatening discovered attacks on this king. Black has pretty much always played king d6 here, but now white gets to play this pawn sacrifice d4 to open even more lines to the king, and again, this is very dangerous for black. If black were to accept this sacrifice, this bishop will be showing up here on f4 very shortly, and it's kind of hard to imagine this king surviving. Black might have an alternative here, though. Instead of playing king d6, black could play this move queen h4, attacking this bishop. Black is offering to give up their own rook in the corner, so white can play knight takes c7. Black can play here king d7, and if white takes that rook in the corner, then black will get a bishop back for it, and black is still up material. And the attack for white looks like it might be fizzling out in that case. White could play here the in-between move queen f7 check, but now the queen will come back and block on e7. And this looks kind of unpleasant for white. White can't give another in-between check here because black would just take the knight, and if white tries to exchange queens here and then win the rook in the corner, now white's up a pawn. It's kind of hard to keep track of the material as it keeps changing, but now the problem for white is that white's knight is probably going to get trapped in this corner, and the black knight can escape. Black can play here king to d6, threatening to play bishop f5, a wonderful multi-purpose move, not only unleashing this rook to attack the knight, but threatening to save black's own knight here with knight c2. White can play here d4, trying to open some lines to the king, buy some time, but black can ignore this sacrifice and play the intended bishop f5. And this looks like it could be bad news for white. It's not so clear if white can recover this knight. This knight's falling on the next turn probably, and it's going to be hard to attack this black king in the center in an endgame. So white should probably not take here on c7. White has a couple alternatives they could consider. Knight b6 might be a very similar version if this knight ends up taking the rook in the corner. White could consider some discovery like knight f4, trying to cut off the queen from the attack on the bishop. But after king d7, what do you really do here? Your knight's hanging, and it's not so clear if you're really getting to this king. If you play queen d5 check, now black can block with bishop d6 and start developing. This queen is free to swing back in the defense, so what do you do here as white? So it's interesting here in this line that black has seemingly always played king d6 in the very few games where this position occurred, and this queen h4 was only found with the help of an engine, but it seems like this is a much more solid defense here for black to white's attack. Kind of a good example of the best defense being a good offense, counterattacking this bishop. And as we saw, it's kind of hard for white to continue the attack here, and knight takes c7 doesn't work so well despite winning the rook in the corner. So if I played the fried liver with white, this line with queen h4 might kind of discourage me from playing this line with a3, letting black take my rook in the corner, and I might prefer to play that bishop b3 line we looked at first, where, as we saw, black is often going to give a piece back to try to stop our attack. So far, we've only been looking at knight to b4. Of course, black's other move here could be knight to e7, simply reinforcing this knight from a kind of safer location where we can't kick that knight away as easily, but this knight also blocks in the bishop. In this case, white's most popular move is to play d4, again as a pawn sacrifice trying to open lines to this king. And black can't really accept this pawn sacrifice because after e takes d4, white's going to have an idea here to play queen e4, and things are not going to work out so well for black. For example, after knight takes d5 is forced, and now queen e4, and black cannot really defend this knight. White's winning the piece back, and white's still going to have a big attack. So after d4, black usually plays c6, reinforcing this pinned knight. And now white has tried several moves. Bishop g5 has been played, simply trying to pin this knight and remove a defender of this pinned knight here on g5. Castle was one popular option, trying to play rook e1, adding more pressure against that king. If white does castle, black can play king d7 here, and it wouldn't be so great if white tried to win material back here on d5. White can win a pawn with knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight d5, and queen d5, but white only won a pawn out of all that. And white still probably isn't getting their piece back, so that's not too appealing. Instead, after king d7, white often here plays bishop to g5, still pinning this knight. And there are some pretty spectacular ideas here found with engine analysis. For example, if black plays knight takes c3, now that that knight is no longer pinned, white can even consider not recapturing and just playing d takes e5, with the idea to possibly threaten to play e6, force the king onto the dark squares, and then white has bishop f4 check. The idea is that after black tries to save this knight, now white can take, black takes with the c-pawn here, white can play e6, and after, for example, king d6, c4, lines are once again going to be open to that king. This knight is currently pinned, and if black plays bishop takes e6, then we see c takes d5, bishop takes d5, and rook f to d1. And the multiple pins here make this a very difficult defense for black. One funny line is if black tries to play king e6, now white can just shift back to the e file with that rook, and the other rook will take its place on the d file. Now the rooks are even more active. Black is up 2 pieces, but probably not for long. In light of this, black might want to try a different defense instead of knight takes c3 here. For example, black can play h6, allowing white to play bishop takes e7. Black can develop this bishop now, and now if white takes here on d5, black can take, and after queen takes, the king can now try to hide on e8. Now that black has a little more control here, there's some white pieces that got exchanged, and the white attack seems to have fizzled out yet again. White can play queen takes e5, and white has 3 pawns for a piece, but black has survived the attack. Black can start thinking about artificially castling with king f7, rook f8, tucking that king away in the corner, and these 2 open bishops could be very strong. This is probably not what white is looking for. So white should probably look to improve on that line, and this is kind of how it goes when you're analyzing these very complex tactical openings. You find some idea that's good for one side, so then you have to look for an improvement from the other. And here white can play bishop takes e7, bishop takes e7, bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, and knight takes d5 instead of queen takes d5, and now it's going to be harder for this king to come back to e8 and hide because this diagonal would be open. One line, for example, is king e8. White can simply play rook a to e1, and it's no longer so easy for this king to find a permanent shelter. This e5 pawn's under attack, and for example, rook f8 can be met by queen h5 check. Black can still try to artificially castle with something like rook f7, rook takes e5, and now king f8. But after rook f to e1, white retains a lot more pressure than they did in that other line. White has 3 pawns for a piece, and the pressure here is continuing on the black king. So that was a lot. We looked at a lot of lines here in the fried liver after both knight to e7 and knight to b4, both moves that defend that knight. Kind of the moral of the story here is if you want to avoid all this, you probably shouldn't allow it as black. It is very dangerous. The pressure white has against your king is going to last a long time, so if you want to make sure this doesn't happen to you, go click the video in the description, watch my video on the Italian game, and you can find out how black can avoid the fried liver attack. But if all this appeals to you, if you love these super sharp, double-edged positions, and you're okay knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster, then the fried liver attack might be for you. Thank you very much for watching. And remember to check out chesspathways.com. Please type it in right now. Get signed up there. It only takes a couple seconds. I'm trying to help more players become masters, hopefully in a fraction of the time that it took me. I'll send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you sign up, and I'll make sure you don't miss out on any new content. So type it in right now, chesspathways.com, and I'll see you there. Thanks.